Speaker.
Ian McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It gives me pleasure to speak on the third reading of the Papawai and Kaikokirikiri Trusts Amendment Bill. There's a number of things I want to address before I start. One is that I've spent the last couple of hours since I learnt I was speaking on this bill searching the internet. But I wasn't searching to see how Donald Trump was doing. I was searching for that whakapapa to Papawai that certainly Joe Hayes talked about and many others have. I couldn't find any. So I apologise for that. I'm like Alistair Scott, I'm going to have to get there in the future. I'm relying on future generations. Mr Speaker, I'm also going to have to speak to the English version of this bill because I certainly wouldn't be able to understand the other one, and I apologise for that. But I'm very pleased that it's currently in English. But, Mr Speaker, this is a very topical thing today, and before getting on to that, I want to congratulate Alistair Scott for bringing this bill to Parliament, and whilst I did hear him say he has little to do with the bill, in fact he's brought it here. He is the member for Wairarapa, and he is representing the people of Wairarapa in doing so, and I think that's really important. I also want to quickly acknowledge Nook Karako and the members of the Maori Affairs Select Committee for speedily expediting this bill through the House, because I think that these little things are aggravating, and unless they get pushed through in a reasonable fashion, and obviously with the agreement of everyone, then I think they are difficult. Speaker, I want to just talk very briefly about trusts, because in this morning's paper there's a very interesting headline which says ignorant trustees run risk of nasty surprise in court, and I'm not for a minute talking about the trustees of the Papawai and Kaikokirikiri Trust, but it is interesting that many trusts in New Zealand have been let go, I guess, and they brought some interesting statistics up this morning about that in the course of this article, and I think it applies to many trusts in New Zealand at the moment. So some of the statistics were that a third of trustees did not know the contents of the trust deed they were administering. Over half didn't keep an up-to-date minute book, and only 60% of them met annually. That's pretty staggering when you think about the fact that there are 500,000 trusts in New Zealand set up for all sorts of reasons. Many of them were set up in answer to government legislation to either protect assets or people. A large number of them are set up to ensure elder family members are looked after and protected by their trustees. Interestingly, taxation legislation throughout the ages has influenced the formation of many trusts. And right now, I think you'll find there are discrepancies, not discrepancies necessarily, there might be deliberate discrepancies in the tax legislation, which actually penalises trusts to some extent. In other words, they are taxed at a greater rate than perhaps companies or individuals even. And so there are all sorts of influences quite outside of normal course of events that influence trusts being set up. I think that's interesting, and in some ways it causes the large number of trusts, and as I said, I think 500,000 trusts in New Zealand have been set up for various reasons. Many of those trusts are charitable, many are not. This trust is a charitable trust, and also many of the trusts set up in New Zealand throughout history have been primarily for education purposes. This is another one of those trusts. But I want to go back to the fact that this trust was set up in 1943, Mr Speaker, and I guess that this is the first time it's been back through Parliament. So it's set up by a 1943 Act. It's the first time it's been back through Parliament to be reviewed in that time. So the trustees have certainly done a pretty good job throughout the history of this trust, because it's still in existence and still pretty strong. I want to congratulate those trustees who have served both before and who serve now, because I think it's a pretty significant effort to have kept a trust going for this length of time and to have it in such a state that it can come back to Parliament and be renewed for future generations and enable them to I guess, use the proceeds of that trust for whatever they see fit for their people, and particularly for education purposes. I myself was educated at through an Anglican school, and my electorate, the Rangitikei, has a large number of Anglican schools in it, a number of boarding schools of Anglican origin. We also have the odd Catholic one, and I imagine that this has freed up a bit of cash from the Anglicans to give to the Catholic, which is a little unfortunate. but we'll forgive them. Because I imagine that, particularly with a school like Papawai, owned by the Catholic Church, and no doubt the Anglicans are going to part with a bit of cash. I also remember in my younger days spending a fair bit of time playing rugby against Te Aute, and they were always a lot bigger than I was, those fellas. So obviously in the Wairarapa they fed them pretty well as well. But it is an interesting piece of our history, the fact that we have education. Also in my electorate we had the Turakina Maori Girls College, which very recently closed, another Anglican school, which was set up first of all in Turakina, then moved to Martin. But I think what we should remember is that education, like life, has changed dramatically, and so the reasons that this trust was set up in 1943 to provide education for the young people of the Wairarapa, and particularly Ngāti Kohununu, have changed dramatically, and so now there are different reasons for us needing to distribute income, and it is still equally as important that we give our rural children, particularly, the opportunity to attend boarding schools, because in many parts of our more remote electorates, it's very difficult for families to get their children away to school and get them back in the same day. So having the opportunity to send our remoter rural children to boarding school is hugely important. And I imagine that that's one of the objectives this trust will have in some way in the future. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity for the trust too. So I want to congratulate all those who have brought the trust back to Parliament in that in this form with a view to giving it a new life. Most trusts in New Zealand, Mr. Speaker, are set up with an 80-year lifespan. So it's quite easy to see that trustees or beneficiaries even seldom last that long. Often these trusts wind up early, or significant change or even resettlements required. And that is an alternative, of course, for a trust like this, is to resettle in a different form. And I think that Nukurako informed me before that to bring this trust, or this Act, back to Parliament and run it in a dual language, it's got to actually start again, because effectively you can't change an Act halfway through its system and change the language structure of it. So for it to be reinvented in Te Reo and English, it's going to have to come back to Parliament and recommence its lifespan, I guess, a little bit like a resettlement. It's not so long ago, in fact, that we had the Waitangi Trust through this Parliament for a little modification, and I guess that's another such example where the deed has passed its use-by date and needs restructuring. So the structure of many trust governance modes is no longer suitable in this day and age. Mr. Speaker, changes to the trust or by the trustees courtesy of this bill presented to Parliament by Wairarapa MP Mr. Scott. I just want to talk a little bit about those changes and what they hope to achieve. And I think that the really important thing is that they enable our young to have an opportunity they may otherwise not have had. And I think the other objective of this Act is to spread the opportunity for the trustees to distribute income. And I noticed that the Rangatani have a little, got their, or have their opportunity to get their hands on a little bit of this cash. I just hope the Manawatu version of the Rangatani aren't coming over the hill and trying to nick a bit of it. But I'm sure they wouldn't do that. But I think it is very interesting because as again someone said to Alistair Scott a little earlier, we don't know what's going to happen to future generations of our families, and so it's best we're prepared for all eventualities. Mr. Speaker, I think that this kind of trust and the history it brings to Parliament with it is what New Zealand's all about, and I think it's really important that this House is able to give these sorts of trusts the opportunity to reinvent themselves and create a real, a place in modern New Zealand that they can serve their people, give them opportunity and enable them to, make the best of what I think is an extraordinary country. So I just want to very briefly congratulate the trustees once again. The member who brought this bill to the House, it's been very interesting for me to speak on a bill like this at such short notice, but I congratulate everyone, commend it to the House and hope it makes very good progress in the future. Thank you, Speaker.
The next call is a split call.